It's been a pleasure to serve as the chair of the board of this Arboretum and to come to know you all, and it's an even greater pleasure to stand up today and thank you. And now, to move on to the wonderful program we're going to hear today about our cold hardy fruit and nuts, I'm asking Mark Wolf, our executive director, to introduce our friends who are back for this presentation.
Thank you, Abby. Thank you very much. So, as Abby said, we're welcoming Scott and Allison back. Their Arboretum is near us in Stone Ridge, and we consider them generous neighbors and really good friends. Generous because we have 2 pawpaws that they gave us a while ago, and they're going to talk about the pawpaw tree, that are still alive and well. They gave us a really cool plant called a devil's walking stick that is not alive anymore. I think the voles ate it. And they, oh great. And they gave us 2 Dunstan chestnuts. As many of you know, the chestnuts were decimated 100 years ago, and there are still some here and there in the wild. And there's a Dunstan chestnut that is a cross between Chinese and American. And that was actually a housewarming gift for us, I think, when we opened the building. We appreciate you coming back, and we're really excited to hear about the book. So I'm going to read their little bio. Allison, it's Levy, right? Or Levy. Allison Levy and Scott Serrano are both exhibiting visual artists who co-founded Hortus Arboretum and Botanical Gardens in New York's Hudson Valley. Over 2 decades ago, they began gardening as a source of inspiration and for raw materials for their art. Over time, their interest in growing a wider selection of plants expanded until the garden encompassed 11 acres and became their primary passion. Along the way, they began planting a vast diversity of plants, both edible and ornamental. This grew into an extensive collection of cold hardy cactus, magnolia trees, viburnums, and grafted fruit trees with a focus on rare, underutilized, and endangered plants. Their Arboretum is now a non-profit organization and a level 2 Arboretum with a total of 21 acres. And I encourage you to visit. It's a really great, wonderful place. You have open days, right?
Weekends we're open to the public.
Okay. And there are copies of their book, which I have read cover to cover. It's really wonderful, very good hands-on advice, especially for growing in our cold hardy region. And we just did a second printing of 21 Trees, the book about the building of this building and the trees that hold it up. And so that will be for sale also after the talk. So I welcome Allison and Scott.
I think we should take our masks off because
so.
I'll understand you, but they might not understand you. So I still wouldn't understand him with a mask. Well, hello, everybody.
Hi.
Thank you so
Hello.
much for being here. And thank you, Mountaintop Arboretum, for inviting us back to talk. We love to talk, so I'll just move straight into talking. Well, we love gardening and plants, and let's see, so bear with me. Let's see.
You should point at the computer.
Thank you.
There we go.
All right,
We're
so
on.
here we go. As Mark had mentioned, Scott and I run an arboretum in Stone Ridge, New York, in Ulster County. And we look up to Mountaintop Arboretum for several reasons, but we consider it like our older brother. And we're a mom and pop startup. We've been doing this for over 20 years. We do now have 21 acres of gardens. About 8 of it are cultivated.
We bought the swamp in the back of our property, so it couldn't be developed.
Tonight we're talking about native edibles, but we grow all sorts of plants, including ornamental trees, native plants we love, but we also love non-natives. And we're really interested in experimenting with the hardiness range and what can be grown in our environment. As we know, with climate change, things are really affecting the ways we grow plants and how we think about things. And so that's one of the things that we're interested in doing here. As Mark mentioned, we do have open days. We partner with the Garden Conservancy for that kind of thing and digging deeper, but we started opening our gardens from Mother's Day to Halloween on Saturdays and Sundays. And if you visit our website, which I'll have up at the end slide, which is hortusgardens.org, you can reserve to come. And just showing you some eye candy. We really believe that
High bush blueberry.
every time of the year, while we're open, is a wonderful time to come visit. And we do classes, we do tours, we do talks on site. We work with garden clubs and other community groups who are interested in just knowing about plant life in general. And we're going to start off with American chestnut, and Scott will speak about that.
Okay, Castanea dentata cross Mellissima Dunstan. When American chestnuts were wiped out by the blight, Howard Dunstan, who was a fruit grower in Tennessee, a tree grower in Tennessee, was contacted by a man in Ohio who had one chestnut survive the blight that had killed all of his other trees. And he sent scions to Howard Dunstan for grafting. Howard Dunstan then called the U.S. Department of Agriculture and asked for improved nut varieties from China to be crossed with it. And the reason he did that is because Chinese chestnut is not affected by the blight. It's evolved at the same time. Took those, crossed them, then grew those for 4 or 5 years, then took the pollen and crossed back once again. So it's 3/4 American, a little tiny bit Chinese. And we've had about 4 or 5 years of American chestnuts from them. They're delicious, wonderful. The trees are beautiful. There's the male flowers coming out, and the female flowers are tiny little flowers on the ends, which eventually become the fruit. Trees kind of seem to be an intermediate between a Chinese chestnut and American chestnut. Great dragonfly, darn her. Maybe 30 feet. Seems to be about zone 5. You need 2 trees for pollination. Good drainage would be important. I think when these are waterlogged, they tend to get diseases, which is why chestnuts, I think, in Appalachian forests are generally found in mountainsides. My son for the summer is trying to hike every hiking trail in our area, and he said he went through a section of mountainside in our area where there were dead chestnut trees that resprouted suckers and shoots, and it was along a mountainside, and he said he counted hundreds along one mountainside, and that's where they would tend to be. They would be on sloped areas where they like drainage. Other than that, ours have grown successfully for about 10 years and never had the blight. It's been really great. You need 2 trees for cross-pollination, and one of the virtues of a chestnut tree is we've seen 4-foot chestnut trees actually produce nuts, as opposed to some trees where it's 30 years, 20 years. So chestnut trees actually go into fruit production at a fairly young, nut production at a fairly young age.
Right now at the Arboretum, our trees have, one of the trees is full of nuts. These are the outer casings. And I would say, in the next several weeks, they should be able to crack open.
Yeah.
And that's what
Yeah.
they look like.
And if you wait for them to crack open and fall out of the trees, you're not going to see the nuts. The squirrels are going to take care of them for you. So we found when they first crack open, if you take hooks and pop them off the trees and put them in a box in your living room, they'll slowly crack open and open over a period of weeks, and you can eat them and without the critters taking all of them. But they're wonderful. Excellent quality nuts.
And low maintenance. I mean, that's part of one of the
No
things that we've been
diseases.
looking for. Yep.
Yeah, our book, one of the themes is no spraying. There's nothing that has to be sprayed in our book, which is why there aren't apples and peaches in our book, because they're a nightmare. So these are all things that don't have to be sprayed.
Another couple little eye candy.
And that's when they popped open.
And this is American hazelnut, Corylus americana, another great native tree, shrub tree. I guess it depends on where it's sited and its aspect. In our gardens, I'd say it's about 15 to 18 feet
Yeah.
large. Ours is sited in a part shade environment where it's slightly moist, but they're fairly adaptable trees, adaptable really to the heavy clay, which is something that we have a lot in our area. As I said, they're part shade in our arboretum, but they can also take full sun. Sometimes you'll see them out in the wild along stream or wet areas that were alluvial. You will need to have more than one in order to have fruit production, but if that's not something you want and you just want to have a beautiful native shrub, you can see this is almost I call this a 4-season plant, because these male flowers, the catkins, actually start to present themselves in late fall as the leaves become deciduous, and they will continue to grow. You could see here, this is early winter. And they're beautiful because in early spring, when nothing much is going on, you have these beautiful flowers that hang and they move in the breeze, which is one of the ways that they actually pollinate one another. This is a nice stand of them. And here I'm showing you the flower up on the top, tiny, teeny female flower. So these are really dependent on wind for pollination.
Because there's no pollinators in early. Everything's asleep.
Yeah. Again, I'm showing you the tiny, teeny little flower.
These can be cross-pollinated with European hazelnuts, like bred varieties for large production, or themselves. You need two for
Pollination. Hazelnuts also go by the name of filbert. They also go by cobnut. It's based on the involucre, how long or short it is covering the nut. Native to Massachusetts and a lot of the Northeast is Corylus cornuta, which is the beaked hazelnut, where the outer husk basically covers the whole nut. Taste is pretty much the same to our taste. Someone could argue that, I'm sure. Beautiful, just a very stunning ornamental plant. So you've seen the male flower, female flower, but the fruiting nut is gorgeous.
And European hazelnuts are just larger. And then the kind that go into the production of making Nutella are like American are like this, European are like this, and then the double-sized varieties which we have are about like this. And those are the kind for making Nutella and Belgian chocolate and stuff. They're just larger, but the flavor is
the
all
same,
similar quality.
It's the amount of work that you want to do to get to the nut. Great wildlife plant though. In our gardens, I have to put bags over the nuts because they're tricky. If you harvest the nuts too early, they a lot of times will not fully ripen. And this last month of when we've been in a drought, the nuts haven't really had the ability to form inside the involucre. So what looks like it might be formed might not really be. And we don't give extra irrigation to our hazelnut area. So if you did, you probably would be able to have the nut meat happening, which is about now, maybe another 2 weeks. They haven't fallen off the shrub yet into the bags. We're bagging them because the chipmunks and squirrels don't really care if the nut is ripe like we do. They don't have that fine taste. So here I'm going to show a couple different images of some of the hazels that we've found. Here, this was along like a rail trail where you could see the involucre is very short compared to the ones that we showed you earlier that are at the Arboretum. So these were in the wild.
One of the queens, American persimmon, Diosporus virginiana, an incredible fruit tree. This has more of a wild character than Asian persimmons, which have been bred by Chinese emperors to be this large. American ones were eaten by Native American tribes until the 19th century, and then people started picking them. White people, colonial people saying, oh, you should plant that one for larger fruit, and they started being selected. So American ones are still kind of small and wild. American ones are not as sweet as Asian ones, but they make up for it by having a complex flavor. I kind of think it has a mild butterscotch molasses flavor to me. And you never want to eat underripe persimmons. You want to eat them dead ripe. And the best
Or
way to
you'll
do
never
that,
eat a persimmon again if you put
you
too
want
much
the
like,
tr-
oh.
Our trees drop 3 or 4 at a time on the ground, and I have to race our dogs out to make sure they don't grab them. And when they're dead ripe, they have a mild butterscotch molasses flavor. Absolutely delicious and wonderful. I think the best thing to do is to get a reliably self-fertile, because otherwise they're separate male and female plants. Persimmons are extremely complicated. Originally, they were bisexual trees, and then over time, through evolution, they became separate male and female. But in the upper Midwest, there remains a stand of them that still have the self-fertile capacity, and those are the ones that were selected. The early golden is a 19th century variety. I would highly recommend, our favorite is a John Rick, which produces 2-inch large, clean, beautiful Halloween orange fruit. Zucchus is another popular one that's a tiny little small butterscotch flavored one that's really excellent. I say if you have a small yard and you do not have a lot of room, Zucchus is good. If you want a big, large, stately tree that drops lots of persimmons, John Rick is wonderful. Proc and Moeller are also reputation. Great adaptable no spray crop. In 18 years, ours has never had a problem. There's a scilla, a little kind of a leaf hopper that chews on our leaves and makes them look ugly, and a little bit of mold on the leaf, but that's never affected crops. And animals will occasionally harvest ours, but it's never stripped. Again, in 18 years, even with the drought, ours look a little bedraggled and beaten up, but there's still fruit on them.
And I'm lingering on this shot because I just want you to notice. So this is one that is in late fall. The leaves have all fallen. Certain cultivars of persimmon, the fruit will actually persist on the branches, which is a really nice aspect. I know on our John Rick, the fruit tends to fall on that particular. But this, I believe, is a Zucchus that Scott had mentioned. And if you can take note, the way you know a persimmon's dead ripe, besides it being smushed on the ground, is that it gets this kind of shiny appearance, translucent, and sometimes it'll also get little markings, like you see the dark spots here. And I've seen persimmons at the very, very top of some of our trees because we can't get to them, and they'll persist through January. So that's really a cool thing, especially for people who are really interested in wildlife, because this is a wonderful treat for the birds that are hanging out.
And I think
in
Native
winter.
American tribes pounded these flat and made breads out of them and preserved them as a traveling food. A traditional colonial thing is persimmon bread that's like a kind of a carrot cake made with crushed up persimmon and molasses that brings out that. I've made a persimmon almost like a maple syrup by crushing up persimmons and cooking it down with honey. That's really excellent. It kind of maintains the character of it.
And really, for most people, I'd say one tree is plenty.
A
But
good-
if
good
you end up
productive.
having a lot, you can freeze the fruit, and then you can make breads or puddings. And again, you could see how some of the fruit has started to split. That's how you know it's
And
ripe.
I would say small trees like Zucchus are going to be 20. John Rick looks like it's going to be more 30, 40 feet. I would say if you can avoid it, avoid meter. Meter is the one that seems to be easy to graft, so everybody sells it.
Yeah.
But that retains astringency. There's a slight sour thing, as where the Zucchus is like eating more like molasses and sugary. It's much better. And the John Rick,
Delicious.
much better.
Delicious. And if you've never had an American persimmon and you want to, you come to the Arboretum, because one of the things that we have learned, it's partially why we've written the book, is that if you don't taste something, you might not get inspired to plant it. So one of the things that we try and time when we do tours there, but now we're open on the weekends as well, if you come and they're ripe, we will say, would you like to try one? And that way it gets you motivated to, yeah, sure, and maybe it's something you'd want to plant. And that's just showing that what I was talking about earlier, lasting well into late fall, early winter.
Another great American plant that's kind of undervalued, beach plum, Prunus marittima. First of all, most people want to plant this because it gets thousands and thousands of blossoms. Really, really beautiful. I always say this is the kind of plant you could run a car over and probably not kill it. And I've seen it on Long Island, where on beaches where people are literally parking their cars on top of these. And they grow back. They're just tough. They're very hard to kill. They grow in the worst possible place, which is beachfronts, sand, salt, wind, abuse, and they come back and they shine. But if you give them full sun, and they must be in full sun, they can't be in part shade, and good drainage, we have heavy clay soil, but it's on a slope and drained, they'll produce thousands of flowers. I'd say the biggest hit against these is they're inconsistent. Some years you get thousands and thousands of small wild plums, and some years, like this year, you don't get a lot.
You
or
get
if
3.
anything. Yeah,
We
yeah,
got
because
3.
they're big strip.
Actually, we didn't even get them,
Yeah.
so let's just be honest.
Because they will
about
be
that.
eaten by
Yes.
critters when they're young.
Yeah.
So the flavor to me is like wild plum and Concord grape kind of mixed. Small but wonderful. And they're variable. You're dealing with a wild plant. So sometimes you eat one and go, oh, that's not really particularly. And sometimes you eat one and go, wow, that's incredible.
Save that pit.
Large fruiting varieties tend to be sweeter, and there's a mythical stand in Maine that has yellow fruit that's supposed to be the best in the United States, and I've never seen that. This is closely related. There's about 12 wild American plums, and we actually, Perunus americana, wild American plums, we found growing in Accord along a rail trail, and they were wonderful on her birthday last year, and they were wonderful.
Nature's gift.
Yeah. Other than that, they grow 8 to 10 feet. Perfect, and these would be perfect in a suburb between houses as a privacy hedge because they're kid pickable size. You know, it's not going to get like this.
Wait a second, or someone who's
yes,
5
sure,
feet.
yes. They're good, and also because of the flowers, they're beautiful kind of pollinator supporters.
And just to give you, I try and always the last slide to have a hand reference so you get this, the size of what the fruit is. These are not the plums that we're used to getting at our farmer's market, right? These are slightly larger than, let's say, a big cherry, but worth it, delicious, makes the best jam. So I highly recommend. Black currant, Ribes americanum. So if you came for hers and his tour at our arboretum, this would be on my tour, but not on his tour. Anyone with me on my tour liking black currant here? Thank you. I got 1, I got 2. Excellent. I actually really like this plant. This is one of the ones that for maybe 8 years, 10 years, I did nothing to. And it did reward us with some really beautiful flowers. If you know anything about ribes in general, I don't want to get too into it, so you should buy the book because the book goes into it. But there was a ban on having currants, black currants, as well as gooseberries and others because of the white pine industry at the turn of the century. That's all I'm going to say. We have never seen a problem. We have lots of white pine.
Pines are taking over our
property. It's not to say that it's not a real problem, but we haven't seen that here.
And if you're going to put in 300 currant bushes to start a currant wine industry, you should do blight resistant. And there are blight resistant currants.
Cultivars, yep.
Just to be conscious.
So this is the fruit. It hangs in strigs. Generally speaking, this fruit ripens a little bit unevenly. So it's not like you can go out and just pick the strig and all the fruit will be ripe. However, again, there are strategies for picking it. Bagging it is a really wonderful way to let the fruit all ripen. I have 3 small shrubs that grew into one big one. I have plenty to share with birds and other wildlife, and I always have jam. I like to stand in front of the shrub and eat out of hand. This is a clove currant. Was found in the Midwest. This particular one is Crandall's currant. Its flowers are larger and highly fragrant. So I have this in a pathway where I walk by. The fruits are larger. They have as Scott would say, the musky flavor as well. But this is also a nice alternative for those who don't want to go, who want a little nice fragrance in the spring, because the straight species does not have any smell whatsoever. It's just beautiful
That
yellow
we smell.
flowers.
That we smell.
That we smell.
Pollinators
Yes,
smell,
thank
but
you.
we
It's
don't.
true. It's true. And just kind of showing some more images of the flowers. Again, I talk about a lot of edible plants being highly ornamental, and I think that's a really important selling point to get people excited about planting food trees and shrubs. Just a couple more images. A lot more images. Did I go the wrong way? Nope. Okay.
Another
okay.
hers.
So
another
this is
hers.
another one that if you were at Fortis, this would be on the Allison tour. This is chokeberry aronia. Most people are like, I didn't even know you could eat aronia. I thought it was just a wildlife plant that birds like. But quite frankly, if you get the right plant, it could be very tasty. And there's some ways to go about that, which are taste when you're in the wild, if you taste something that tastes good. They are now doing cultivars that are like Nero or Viking that were bred for their flavor content. I have found that if I freeze the fruit first, it's sweeter. If I freeze the fruit and then dehydrate, it's super sweet. It's crazy sweet. And these have such a high level of antioxidants because of their dark color. They're just really highly nutritious. The one thing people don't realize is that in early spring,
Beautiful,
it's as beautiful as a flowering pear tree. I won't say a flowering plum because that's a little too much, but beautiful, low maintenance, lots of different sizes that this plant comes in depending on the cultivar. They have some that are low growing mounds. They have some that go to 3 feet, some that are 8 feet. The one nice thing about this plant, it's so adaptable. You have a sunny site, great. You have a shade site, great. Clayey, sandy, wet, dry. This is one where really you could drive a car over it.
Yeah.
It's really hardy that way. It's very adaptable.
We saw this in Mount Batty in Maine in pockets on cliff edges, growing on cliff sides.
And then we saw this also off a rail trail right
in
by
a
Water's
swamp,
Edge.
near a
Yeah,
swamp,
so-
very adaptable. Also beautiful fluorescent deep red fall
Yeah,
colors too,
thank
very
you.
handsome.
I don't think I have a photo of
And
that,
that-
but their fall color is actually what the plant sellers and markets are pushing this plant as, not as a food plant, but as the fall color because it gets bright red, like a blueberry red.
And that's a creeping variety that
Yes,
you just
sorry,
showed. That's
that was
low grow.
low
That was
grow.
a low grow? Yeah.
Yep.
And this is another wonderful cranberry vaccinium macrocarpum. Anything that holds water is a cranberry bog, which means if you go into a hardware store and buy a small bucket and put peat moss or pine needles, soil and sand in and stick a cranberry thing and bury that in the ground and cover the top so no one knows the dirty secret that you have it buried in the ground, you have a cranberry bog and it'll creep out 8 or 10 feet and slowly grow and spread through a garden. So there's a plastic container buried in the ground with a full-size small cranberry bog with probably 12, 20 different plants. Other than that, these can be planted in average soil, but they need to be augmented when it's dry like it has been now. Other than that, pretty pest-free, pretty disease-free, beautiful, subtle but very beautiful flowers. Great. Our cranberries ripen around. They're starting to get color now. Wonderful, beautiful.
And
The only pest that has ever hit these is one winter voles got into this patch and lived there for 3 months and ate, sheared the whole thing apart. They ended up growing back, but it was very depressing. They took a mature bog and it's like a mower had gone through and cut them all.
Yeah, that was a very sad moment. I will say a couple years ago over at one of our big box stores like a Lowe's, I think, was selling cranberry not as a food plant again, but more as a ground cover and had larger foliage. So
As per our book in the late 19th century, early 20s, there was a big industry in cranberries. There were like 20 states importing thousands of tons of cranberries. It was a big thing, and then that kind of phase passed. And now it's sort of a neglected thing, so there aren't very many cultivars. There's one called Pilgrim, which is extra productive, that produces more fruit, but that hasn't been quite discovered
Wait, can
yet.
we just go back to this really, really quickly?
Flowers,
Look
yes,
at the
very
flowers.
beautiful.
They're small. This is one of those plants where you really have to get up into it, face to face to really get it.
Very
I had
beautiful.
never noticed them before, and I guess this was also considered craneberry,
Yeah,
was its
'cause it looks
original
like a
name
crane,
because of
yeah.
the little flowers looking like a crane. So I just wanted to point that out. Something about sometimes going macro in your garden and really looking and noticing
And
things.
again,
Yeah.
needs acidic soil. Peat moss, if you don't want to use peat moss, because there's ethical reasons, sometimes people don't want to use
Yeah.
peat moss, go beneath a pine tree and get,
Pine duff.
don't
yeah.
dig the shovel directly into the pine. Go sideways and scrape a couple inches here and there off and make pine duff that's acidic, mixed with sand and soil, and you'll get, or if you already have acidic soil. But that's what all you need.
Elderberry, Sambucus canadensis, American elderberry, another wild plant. I'm sure you must have this all over the Arboretum,
Yeah.
right? Generally not thought of as a food plant, but a lot of foragers talk about this plant, a lot of nutritionists, herbalists. We love this plant. This takes advantage of disturbed areas, weedy areas, shade areas, sun areas. We have a large stand of it that we didn't put in.
The worst growing
yeah,
conditions,
or
slightly
shade,
boggy,
yeah.
shade, horrible, which will kill any other fruit tree. And this is thriving in it.
Thanks to some birds.
Yeah,
I
thanks
guess,
to
yeah.
some birds. And when I say that, we have a bush that's 25 feet wide by 20 feet tall. It's just been suckering, and it's this glorious giant, and we don't have to do anything.
We love this, well, I love this because for many years I was using the flowers to make a wine, but you can also have a German friend who will go
Yes.
cut the flowers for you and dip them in a batter
Make pancake batter and dip them and fry
And-
them,
and then come with,
and then cover them with powdered sugar.
and you get this floral quality of a fritter that was amazing. It was something that she grew
Because
up
they
on. It
taste
was
like
delicious.
lemons. So they're extremely decadent and very good. That's a very northern
But if
European.
you didn't want to go that
Very
route, you
good.
could easily make like a beverage, which is what we've done. You do have to be careful because of the glycosides that are in it that can make your stomach upset, which
Yeah.
just means you just want the flower parts. You don't want any of the green stems.
Yeah, or the berries.
Or, well,
Not
you're
the-
jumping
yeah,
ahead.
yeah,
I
yes.
didn't get to the berries, but yes. And also, it's a very big host plant for all different types of pollinators. Another wonderful reason to be growing this. We have, and I know we're talking just native, but I just want to say, we have tried for many years and probably have killed at least a dozen European cultivars, which come out with this black negligee or black
yes,
lace.
and those all die,
They're
unfortunately.
beautiful. But lately in the Midwest, there's been a big push by some of the universities to breed larger berries. We've been just growing Adams, Yorks, and Adam and York, and then the one that a bird put out for us. But I have seen images of some of the berries that they're producing now, and they are beautiful. They're
Yeah,
very
I would
large.
say within
yeah.
within the places that sell food plants, like in the nurseries, you're going to see Bob Gordon and Wildwood. Those are the two you're going to see. Those are the University of Missouri introductions, because there's a cottage industry and elderberry wine there, and they were asked by wine growers to start production, and those are double-sized berries, they're very large, and those are the ones that the Midwest has developed, and so that's like the hub of breeding improved elderberries.
And
right
some of them now are, instead of hanging down, they're not hanging, they're upright. So these are ripe now. You would go, well, they were ripe a couple months ago, but in the picture,
the
they're ripe
birds
now.
have taken them,
And
yes.
again, this, you could strategize by putting little bags on them if it was something you wanted to go and collect. We used to make, I haven't done it in a couple years, I used to make a syrup where I just do a little bit of a sweetener and clove, which is a preservative, and you can mix it when you have a sore throat, or you can mix it when you have a vodka. I mean, you could just do
These
one
are
of those
very
things.
these
It's
are very
really great,
high
yeah.
in vitamin C and zinc, so that's why all the herbal remedy things have this as a flavor ingredient. So if you make this with sugar and cloves to preserve it, it becomes essentially a cough syrup that can be used, or a tea that can be made. Very hyper productive. And if you cook that with
sorry.
sugar, the berries and strain it, it makes almost like a Welch's grape juice type drink. It's really, really good, and it's very healthy for you too.
Is that a cultivar or is that?
No, that's
That's
a
the
wild.
wild.
That's the wild one. Yeah, it can be quite productive when they're
When
they're
there's
going.
rain.
When you have rain, yes.
there's
yeah.
rain, yep.
Yes, when there's rain.
May apple, Podophyllum peltatum. I'm sure you have a big stand of this
Yes.
here. If you can get here when they have a stand of it and you're able to see the fruits, that is a real treat. Most people don't even realize that the fruit is edible, with some caveats, which I'll get to in a moment. I definitely love this. They call it a ground cover. It's a little tall, I guess, for a ground cover, because sometimes it can get to be 14, 16 inches. But it is a ground cover plant. It opens up like an umbrella in early spring, and you can kind of see the leaf starting to get fairly large, larger than my hand. Let me
Yeah,
see
they
your
can- they
hand.
can- they can be
yeah,
about
fairly large, a mature stand.
old stands.
Woodland setting.
Beautiful,
Likes to
yeah.
be in shade. Most of the time, it's basically one big colony, so that it's not diverse, genetically diverse. Doesn't matter, it will still produce fruit. These are the flowers, very small, underneath the leaf. Most people would never see these unless you're on your hands and knees. I
Yes.
think I was on my stomach to take this photo, to be honest with you. And there's the fruit maturing. If you have a single stem, it's not mature enough, but when you have a double V stem, that's when that's when the flower is mature enough to start to fruit. And this is the fruit during the summertime. And then if we had, I don't want to say normal because nothing's normal anymore, but if we had, let's say, a little bit more rain during our summer, we would have seen that the leaves starting to die back in late August. This time it was the beginning of August. And the fruits have to be yellow in order to be
Squishy.
consumed. A lot of animals like this, a lot of wildlife, raccoons especially. But this year I managed to get one. So the trick about mayapple, and it has a really fascinating history, again, we wrote about it in the book. It tastes like tropical punch. I mean,
Yeah.
it's delicious.
It's like pear and passion fruit.
You can't
maybe.
eat the skin, you can't eat the seeds. Okay, with that said, and it's a small fruit, it's a lot of
It's a
work to
crude.
get that flavor, but it's a native because we're going to talk about one more, a native tropical flavored fruit that's just delicious. And I know that a lot of people historically made jams out of it.
Yeah.
Or jelly,
Yeah.
jellies, not jams.
This is the other queen, another queen. This one, out of everything here, this is the most difficult to grow in this area. This is from Georgia, Tennessee, in the south, where it's like a weed, up into Ohio. Here, it's on the borderline of survival, which means if you get two plants and you want to get them from different people, because if you have one, if you're getting, let's say, two plants from a grower, they're just taking the same genetic material. You want two different gene pools to cross-pollinate. And then you're going to get small plants, and then I'd say keep them as a house plant for a couple years, and then plant them in early spring. The thicker the root system, the more hardy. We have now got a giant colony of these, and when they're happy, they riot. We put them in our greenhouse, so they say, oh, this is like Georgia and Tennessee, which means we're going to grow 45 feet under your greenhouse. We're going to take over your vegetable beds. We're going to grow under the. So these are a wonderful
We're going to
pain
come
in
up
the
to
ass.
2
These are a pain in the
2
butt.
feet of 2 feet
Yes,
of gravel.
yes,
Yeah.
But we get about 150 passion fruit with that. I think any garden would benefit from these flowers. They're absolutely beautiful, but they are aggressive, and that's the alba. It's Passiflora incarnata alba. So this is a very genetically different from the purple, which means good for pollination. The growing industry is starting to pay attention to that to make money, and you notice that because cultivars are starting to appear. There's one that's slightly more blue.
One that's slightly more pink.
Yeah,
a little
so
purple,
yeah, so that's good for genetic, for crossing, and you want to get two for the fruit. These are a traditional Native American food, and also the leaves are used as a natural tranquilizer for people who have insomnia. They're very medicinal. All parts of the plant are used, but we like the fruit, which when you step on it goes pop, hence the name maypop. And
Although I think in the south that you see the greenery
As it
come
pops
up
up.
in May.
Yeah.
In our gardens, I would call it more July pop.
So this is
Outside, not in
yeah,
the greenhouse.
this is marginally zone 5, but protection, like a bucket over them or mulch over them. Once they have 2 or 3 years and they're in, they have been grown into Minnesota. There's places that have this, but they have to be kind of protected. I mean, they're a thug of a plant. They just need to be kind of protected for a while. But absolutely beautiful. The flowers are spectacularly beautiful. You need 2 vines, like I said, and because we're on the end of the range of survival, I would only put these in full sun. I mean, 10 hours, 8 hours. If you want to actually get fruit to ripen, you want the maximum amount of sun if possible. And the best, Rolls-Royce, best qualities of possible soil. Not manure, but everything else. Leaf forest, compost broken down, a thick layer, well-drained soil, and all-day sun. We have grown this outside of our greenhouse, and we've gotten fruit off of it, but inside the greenhouse, it's a riot. I mean, we literally get 150 passion fruit. They lack some of the flavor of tropical passion fruit. They don't have the citrus. You can tell they're passion fruit. So when she makes salsa and I make passion fruit jelly, I squeeze oranges and lemons in mine to make up for that. But it's delightful.
And
it's a great
it
plant.
is a zone 5 plant. So it's one of those that you probably have to coddle if you're in this area for a couple of years, if it's something you wanted. I would say before you do anything, you should come visit us because it's almost a buyer beware. I'm not saying not to plant it, but you should also know what you're getting into beforehand.
Yeah.
I think it's worth it. but-
Ours climbs 20 feet in the greenhouse and dies back to the ground,
But
thank God.
but outside
and
of
then
the
starts
green,
over.
but outside of
yeah,
the
and it's now
greenhouse,
going
it's-
outside of the greenhouse.
No, on the trellis,
Yeah.
we have, it's maybe 6 feet now,
Yeah,
5,
6, 8 feet. Yes, yeah. And again, it's been a harder, drier year, so it's probably fighting to be productive this year. So it's not growing as floriferous outside the greenhouse. The third queen, pawpaw,
lot of queens.
Asamina triloba. Well, it is.
Okay.
The most sugar of all American fruits, George Washington's favorite fruit. Sometimes the most irksome just because it takes 10 years to get fruit, sometimes 12 years. I think with this is a taproot plant. The taproot tells the rest of the plant they're ready to produce fruit. So I've heard several people say, I've had a tree for 6 years, it seems to be doing nothing. And what they don't see is the taproot. The taproot goes down, and with us, we're hitting bedrock after 4 feet, and then going at a right angle and going around rocks, and it gets to a point where the roots are kind of about the length of the tree, and then it says, okay, ready, and next year you suddenly have fruit out of nowhere. And that's what it is, it's the taproot. And because of that, if you cut the taproot on these, you kill the plants. So you put them where you want, and you leave it alone. Also, the other bugaboo that kind of gets people is when these are young, they like shade. When they're full grown, they want to be in all-day sunlight. So if you want to have to skip the pain in the butt that I have to, which is potting and repotting, put them in the ground where you want them, put a tomato cage over them with a shade cloth and keep them in a shade cloth. I think there's other fruit writers who say you can put grafted trees in immediately, but ours has struggled. I would say once they get about 4 feet, they're ready and you can take the shade cloth off on the ready. But a little tiny plant won't make it. But that being said, once they make it, they crank fruit out and they're very easy. We have very bad clay soil with very poor quality, and ours produce fruit, gobs of fruit every year without any problem. No problems, not even raccoons and muskrats who are supposed to love it have stripped our trees. No problem, zero pests, no spraying. And even in the drought, ours look a little beat up, but they're not bad. In years with too much rain and too much water, they seem, doesn't matter. They have definitely a kind of a wild plant quality. Fruit is pollinated by flies, and there's a myth that they have to be carrion flies because the fruit's supposed to look like decomposing
The
meat.
flowers,
Look like
the
the flowers,
flowers,
excuse me,
that
the
not
flowers.
only look but also emit a fragrance
Yeah,
that
yeah.
is
It's
skunky,
flies,
yeah.
any fly. This looks like a common household fly, and it's got pollen all over it. Because of sometimes flies are kind of somewhat lazy bums when it comes to pollination. They're not like butterflies and bees. I'll take a paintbrush and kind of go back and forth between trees. You need 2 trees for pollination, 3 better. And there's the baby fruit starting. Peterson, was it Michael Peterson, became obsessed with these about 10 or 15 years ago and bred gigantic size ones called Pedersen pawpaws. As soon as those are grafted, they are sold out immediately.
Yeah.
They're very difficult to find. Quite frankly, after you had 30 pawpaws, you're done. I've had enough. I don't need the biggest pawpaws. I have 2 grafted ones. What's the difference between grafted varieties and wild? Grafted ones come into fruiting a little bit quicker, and they tend to be larger. Our big wild ones have small, medium, and large. Doesn't matter to me. I like them when they start to hit this point. They start to just get ripe, and they're slightly squishy, like that. That's ripe. And to me, it's banana with a little bit of pineapple and coconut, or
And
banana and
mango.
coconut.
I get a little mango.
Wonderful. But there's a lot of connoisseurs who would say, oh no, don't listen to him. You want them to turn black and ferment, because then they become like banana custard. And for people who like an absolutely strong banana custard flavor, you want it like that. But I like the more banana coconut flavor. It's milder. Other than that, 30 maybe feet, 40, slow growing, and 10 years to get fruit. I always say, if you go into a nursery and you see a pawpaw this big, there's a $200 price tag, and people who don't know think, that's outrageous. There's a cherry tree here that's $35, and don't realize that that $200 tree has been kept for 10 or 12 years and repotted 6 or 7 times. You can't just leave it, which means a guy made $100, or a woman, after 10 years of watering that and repotting it 6 times, and sold it to the nursery. And you can cut 6 years of waiting. So if you can find them grafted or this big, $200, $150, it's worth it. If you want to
But
just.
there's been a big renaissance on this
Yeah.
fruit, and there's a lot of people talking and writing about this now, which is a fantastic thing. All that means, based also on what Scott just said, is there's not a lot of choices out there available. You might be able to get straight species, and for us, we think that's just great, but if you're looking for a particular cultivar, now's the time to order for 2024, so.
I order my fruit.
I'm not kidding.
Order my fruit trees in winter.
Stop, don't give hints. Wait, I'm moving along, wait, I forgot to put my tag on this. This is spikenard, Aurelia racemosa. And if you look right out the
beautiful
window
one.
here, there's such a beautiful
one.
one there. If they're not looking, I'm gonna steal
Yes.
berries from them. This is a great plant that's a herbaceous perennial, but is often mistaken as a woody shrub. And this loves shade.
There you go.
There's my, thank you, I'm a little backwards there, which is fine, it's the last one, so I'm allowed to be. So here you can see the flowers are starting to form. We have this in deep shade. We had tried lots of different aspects, like part shade. Some people would say like part sun, part shade, but really it needs to be in a, well, for us shade, maybe for you guys over here, you're gonna tell me it's a full sun site, aren't you?
No, that's the north side of the village.
Yeah.
Okay.
If it's not
Okay, I
in
know what it
complete shade, it needs consistent watering. This
Right.
is one of my favorite wild berries, and I have moved it 3 or 4 times to try to get the right thing. And I've now put it in full shade, and now we had a drought, and I'm still not getting it.
So here are the flowers, have been pollinated, and the berries start to form. It's really, truthfully, this is a background plant. It's not gonna be like, look at me, look at me. However, it's really a worthy one for those of you who have a lot of woods and shade and are looking for something, because over time this can get to be 4 feet by 4 feet, maybe even 6 feet by 6 feet, which is really nice. And here the fruit is forming, and those are the berries, and Scott makes a delicious drink. You can eat them out of hand. They're small, so you'd have to eat a lot, but we make a delicious
Yeah,
one.
they taste like a cross. This is sarsaparilla. This is one of the things sarsaparilla used to be made. They taste like a cross between licorice and blackberry. And if you cook those and strain them, they make a kind of a spicy licorice blackberry drink. Wonderful. This is one of my favorite wild
Not
berries.
spicy like hot spicy, but tangy,
complex,
zesty,
complex. Bernie, slightly burnt, wonderful.
And again, it's beautiful, so if it's
And-
not something you're into, wildlife, birds, love this berry.
And like all over Asia, the Japanese people call this udo. They harvest the shoots in spring because they have some of that tangy licorice quality. So Native American tribes cut the shoots from this and cook them and use them for stir
Stews
frying.
and- yep.
So there's a multi thing. I want the berries, so I don't want to cut the plant. It's the berries that I want. And the roots were used to make root beer. That's a traditional root beer ingredient.
And so that's 12 native edible fruiting nut plants. There's, I guess, 38 more in our book, that not some more native ones. This is just showing you a little map. It's a little information about us. It's a beautiful 1-hour drive south. And we, like I said, we're not open year round. We're only open now through Halloween.
Saturdays and Sundays.
Saturdays and Sundays, and we're going to hang out. We'll talk more
You got
to
any
anyone
questions?
who,
Is there
yes.
questions
Oh,
now?
question time.
Question
Yes.
time. Questions?
If you have questions, we'll do a little bit of Q&A.
Anybody with questions?
So I planted 2 pawpaw trees this spring or something.
Can he take his mask just to?
8 feet tall, 2 pawpaw trees I bought, and they seem like they've been getting sunburned.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we have one of the worst growing years, the drought. It's probably the drought, but you kind of the size. They weren't like this. You said they're this.
3 foot tall.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
wondering
why.
what
I've been able, keep watering them. If they seem burned up over and over, I would just put a shade canopy for another couple years and let them get a little bit bigger. I had grafted ones that I was told by another famous fruit writer that you could put in, and those, I watered them constantly. They were within an inch of their life of dying. And then once they got a couple about this big, it was like, okay, it's fine. So, and again, I think it's the taproot. Taproot goes down and hits a thing where it's always just slightly moist, and then it's not getting burned anymore. It's
So
just-
like now you don't need your tomato cages anymore, right? You can put that on for the next couple of weeks, right, with a little piece of ag cloth, and you're good.
Great, thanks.
You're welcome.
Yep.
Can you tell me about the American high bush cranberry, the fruit?
Ah, you mean the viburnum?
Yes.
Yes.
That's a
Yes.
viburnum. So we actually call that stinky toe fruit. We love viburnums. We have a large stand of it. And I didn't realize that those berries could get so stinky that not even the birds in late winter take them off. Now, some people love them, and so this could be one of those things where certain specimens, just like people, are slightly different, and maybe that there's something out there that I'm missing. I would love to be able to eat it. I mean, do you have you had it?
Whole boundary filled with them, 2 sides.
And?
And I tried to make stuff with them last year.
And what did you think?
My brother tried to make wine. I made mustard and a hot pepper relish. It kind of passed there.
Okay.
Very tart.
Yeah.
Very bitter.
I call those 5-minute epoxy berries. They give off the smell that epoxy does to me when they're cooked. I have the vote of the 2 worst things I've ever had in our garden. That's one of them, and the other is a mountain ash from the improved varieties, which taste like fermented vinegar to me.
You can. Certain, yes.
Yes. Yeah. But taste is complex. There's a
Right.
lot of people who make cranberry relish out of that.
I love banana custard. He does not. So like when he's talking about pawpaw, right? He only likes it at one level. I like it at all the levels.
Yeah.
So,
That's a good question. Honeyberries.
yeah.
Honeyberries
So
are
I planted
great.
2 varieties. I got fruit like the first year, nothing since.
How big are they?
They're like 6 feet tall.
I'm surprised you're not getting. When you said you got them the first year, that means were they already flowering at the nursery, and then you brought them,
No, they were probably about 2 feet
and they
tall.
hadn't flowered yet at the nursery. Sometimes when sitting in nursery rows, they get pollinated, and you bring things home, and you don't realize they've already been pollinated. Usually with 2, you get crops. Honeyberries are technically from the United States, Canada, Siberia, open tundra, prairies. They're like blueberries, shaped like tubes. There's an early flowering varieties, and then there's a late flowering. That would be the one thing, maybe they didn't sell
The
you a
late,
set.
yeah, late tend to be from Japan, and they do fruit later, and it's only recently that nurseries are
Correctly
correctly
identifying them.
identifying the earlies with earlies. They all flower at the same time.
Yeah.
So one of the things we hear a lot from people is, I bought something, the first year it flowered, I got fruit, it was delicious, and I haven't had anything since. And it could just be a time issue where if you did get the correct set, which we're cross fingers that you did, that maybe next year or the following year, they do
But when you
fruit
say
fairly
you're this
early.
big, that's big and mature. When
Yeah.
people
Oh,
start, they're
Yeah.
like
They're
two.
now like probably 7 years old.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I
They're
think
pretty
it's,
thick. I trim them like a hedge because they.
I
huge.
think it may be that
Set.
you were sold a mixed set. If you know what the cultivar names are, those are the earliest fruit for those of you who don't know, because those are from like Siberia and the Canadian tundra and the prairies. So ours have flowered when it dropped to 17 degrees at night, and the flowers are like, who cares? We're from Siberia. We're from the worst part of the world. It doesn't matter. We've taken, I literally see little flowers at 17 degrees did not bother because they're from the
So it's not like a
Canadian
late
prairie.
frost that's getting.
No, not at
No,
all.
I don't think
no.
so. They're really tough. They don't
yeah.
like where ours are in full sun and they're getting burned up because we're on the warmer part of their growing range. They would like the
Colder,
open
yeah.
tundra, like zone 3. So they would actually probably like a little bit more shade. We're in
the
like
sun.
12 hours of
But you know what,
sun,
an
but
easy fix could be to get
get in one more.
one more, because one of the others is definitely,
Yeah.
it's gonna happen. And I would say go, if you're looking for native, go for the early set.
Yeah, because that produces the fruit the earliest. It's
Mm-hmm.
even before strawberry, so it's great. People say that's as good as a blueberry. Is it as good as a blueberry?
No.
Not really, but it's good. It is good because it gives it's
Well,
food.
wait, I will say, when you do get your fruit, because I know you will, when you get fruit from older specimens, the fruit actually
It is
does
better,
start
yeah.
to sweeten. There's something I'm not, my background's not in biology, so I don't know, but there is
It
something
seems to
about that.
improve. They get better
I
as
was
they
like,
get
wow,
older.
maybe people are right about what they're saying, this being so tasty, because the first couple of years, it was very sour, and I wouldn't say astringent, but sour, so. But it's a beautiful plant, easy to maintain, right? And
Yeah.
so
They're
you
hard.
just need one more.
Your location, are you high elevation like here, or are you more down the?
We are on a small mountain.
We're 900 feet, so,
900?
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
We're like 30 feet where we live.
oh, okay. So, yeah, so we're higher than you, yeah. Yeah.
We're definitely coming to see you.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful. Wonderful.
Your chestnut trees, do they have are they totally blight resistant? Or do they
Yeah,
just
they're not blight proof, but they're blight resistant. We've been growing. It's my understanding when the trees get mature enough to have cracks through them, that's when the blight attacks them. So some people actually coat their trees with mud to stop that period so that the blight can't get into them, or paint them with a light kind of latex paint. But yeah, ours, we have a tree that the trunk's this large and it's kind of going on 30 feet now. And we had a pollinator, and we have a sassafras tree that's the largest one I've ever seen. So we haven't cut it down, and it cracked in half and killed one of our trees, smashed it right down to the ground. So we ended up buying another chestnut. But yeah, we had 4 or 5 years of nuts, and it's grown fast. It's only been there 12 years, and it's getting to be 30 feet in the trunk, and it's completely covered with the chestnuts.
And if you come, you could see we had a storm hit it when it was like 2 years old. So I went out, I was crying. I was like, oh my God, we just put these in. Go get your drill. And
I
we
screwed
drilled
it
through
together.
and we waxed over it, and you can't even see it now. So we went very old school that way.
Put stainless steel
Um,
screws
right.
through it, hold it back together.
But I will say the Dunstan, the couple little points about Dunstan, which I find fascinating because we did a ton of research, and I went to the American Chestnut Society, which they don't talk about Dunstan at all. They have a lot of other cultivars that they push. Dunstan's the only one that's trademarked. So for whatever that's worth, I know that about reading about him and what they're trying to do, their whole push is to get American chestnuts with a little bit of Chinese genes out to more and more people who are not necessarily plant fanatics, but just want to grow a nice Native American tree. So they are starting to send plants to places like Walmart all over the country
Yeah.
and make this plant more affordable to get them in the backyards of people's homes. There is now a big thing happening through a lot of the universities where they have now put a wheat gene into the American chestnut. It's a whole big complicated thing. A lot of people have a problem with the whole
Genetic
idea.
splicing.
But, you know, when you're doing back crossing, you're also changing the genetic makeup of something. So I think we have to be careful and thoughtful about how we view things in general. So.
We had a famous nut grower from the West Coast said he doesn't think Dunstans are American, they're completely pure Chinese, that's what he said. Because a DNA analysis was done on an Oregon tree and said, and we had a student from Cornell, from their ESF come and look at them and to do a survey. And then
balls, yeah.
Yes, and his professor does DNA analysis of chestnuts, so it's way above my pay grade. And they emailed us and said, no, he doesn't think just they're straight. He thinks that it's a blend. American chestnuts have pointed buds, Asian have round, and ours is in between. And between our trees, they're slightly different. They're not exactly the same. You can tell the gene pool's fluid. We have 3, and they're all slightly different. But they're not. There isn't a straight point or an exact oval. It's kind of cone-shaped.
We had one that came from the chestnut lab at ESF. And it was about that big when we planted it. It got to be about 9 years old and was about 9 feet tall. And our understanding was that about the age of 15 years, blight would kick in.
Yes, yes.
But
Yeah.
before it got to that point, the beaver took it.
Yeah. The Chestnut Society was trying to breed and select for best chestnuts, and they did a major thing where they planted out like 500, and they came back to survey 3 years, and deer had eaten like 3/4 of their thing. There was like 75 left. And so a lot of it's what you don't, it's not just gene pool, it's everything else. If it's a dry year and the deer have nothing else to eat, and they're given a mountainside of chestnuts, they will take advantage of it by eating them all. So, their stuff is kind of mixed successful. There's a lot of people trying to keep this alive as a great tree because it's a wonderful American tree.
Any other questions? All right, well, you've been
Yeah,
really,
thank you.
thank you so much
Thank you
for
for
your
letting me-
audience.